No, perfect. Okay, so our recording has started. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here on today's webinar for TN. Today is a FAFSA check-in. As many of us know, the FAFSA is officially open for the 2025-26 school year. Very exciting. And I know that some of us have a few hesitations after last year, but we are remaining optimistic about what this FAFSA cycle will look like for our students and families. So my name is Sarah Marrero, and I'm the coordinator of college access communications at the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Jason Seay, who is the senior director of outreach and our FAFSA wizard. So all things financial aid, Jason Seay is our expert. So we're really excited to hear from him today. And he's going to give us a couple of updates, what we know about the FAFSA so far, if there's anything pertinent that we need to know. He's also going to just recap and walk us through completing the FAFSA with our students. And then we'll be addressing some questions that any of our participants have today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Jason Seay.
Sarah, thank you. Suzette, as always, it's great to join you guys on a Friday webinar. Love it, love it, love it. Happy Friday, everyone. So let's begin. I am going to share, hopefully, there we go. I think we're good sharing slides.
Yep, we can see it.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so let's go completing the 25-26 FAFSA. Let's start here, folks. Fall 2025 deadline. So for our students completing this 2025-2026 deadline, here are the FAFSA, excuse me, who are completing the FAFSA. Here are the deadlines that just to make everyone aware of from a state aid perspective. And this is not, quote, all state aid programs, but just to highlight a few. April 15th, Sarah, I think we should perhaps, because it's recorded, should say this. And this is no, not insinuating anything, but seriously, this is as of Friday, December the 6th, right? All this stuff. As of Friday, December 6th. Priority deadline for the 25-26 FAFSA is April 15th. That is for TSAA, the Tennessee Student Assistance Award consideration, as well as for Tennessee Promise. September 1st is the deadline from a Hope Scholarship, GAMS, Aspire perspective, as well as for our adult students who are looking to benefit from Tennessee Reconnect. And then finally, for students attending a TCAT, and again, this is the 25-26 academic year. You know, TCATs, they are oftentimes students start in the summer. Well, if you start in the summer, that actually is with the 24-25 FAFSA for specifically a fall start. The deadline for the 25-26 FAFSA is November 1st. So Sarah, I just wanted to begin there just to communicate our deadlines from a FAFSA perspective. As always, and many counselors, college access professionals, financial aid administrators that have been doing this for years who are joining us today. And right, Sarah could do this presentation as well as I could. You know, we always encourage our students, the sooner the better, right, to complete the FAFSA. But here are the pertinent deadlines for all to know. One last thing, Sarah, we communicate this at our boot camps that we held statewide a few months ago now. That being said, the financial aid brochure that many of you have, if some of you still need the brochure, please reach out to someone from the team or myself, and we'll get you the new financial aid brochure. Please understand, it went to print prior to the announcement of the delay in this year's FAFSA. So that's why your brochure communicates a different priority deadline. But again, to be clear, April 15th is that priority deadline from a TSAA Promise perspective. Other thing to kind of start out here, for those, we've already started receiving emails from school counselors about Promise and FAFSA reports. Folks, as a reminder, we will let you know when 25-26 records begin populating within our system. I know I had one counselor this week indicate that, oh, we see students are already on the report. Well, they were pulling the 24-25 quote unquote FAFSA report instead of the 25-26 FAFSA report. There is no records yet on the 25-26 FAFSA reports. That said, when we do begin populating the records, as a reminder for school counselors, log in to FAST, the financial aid system of Tennessee. Website is fast.tn.gov. Once you're logged in, you'll click reports, you'll click the high school tab. We encourage, since the majority of our high school seniors complete the FAFSA, the promise report is the best report to track FAFSA completion, specifically at schools where the majority of the senior class completes the promise application, which is majority of high schools. So we do encourage you to pull that Tennessee Promise report once records begin populating in FAST. And as a reminder, select the 25-26 year. From our IT department, I think my feeling, just in talking with them, is they're probably going to take the month of December to prep the system. And so by the time we return from holiday break, that is when records will begin populating fast. And that's when the promise report will begin reflecting FAFSA completion. So I would, as of this moment on December 6th, I would expect these reports to begin populating once you have returned from holiday break. The reminders. Here we are. For a lot of us, week one, but just FYI, FAFSA actually opened November 18th. Or excuse me, November 21st. November 18th was the soft launch, and then officially on November 21st is when FAFSA launched fully. So it actually opened a little bit early. That being said, many of us, this is week one. Few reminders here, especially for those assisting students with FAFSA and having perhaps workshops upcoming in the next week or 2 weeks before holiday break. Those studentaid.gov accounts, meaning the FSA IDs, those must be created and authenticated to start the FAFSA. That generally takes 1 to 3 days. So if I am a individual, if I'm a school, if I'm a college who's leading a FAFSA workshop specifically with new users, the push needs to be to create those accounts. I would say at least 3 days prior to an event. Sarah, this, I will reference collegefortn.org/FAFSA many times. It might be good to drop that in the chat right now, I should say. Forgive me, Sarah. But because at the collegefortn.org/FAFSA site, we do have our one-pagers to assist users creating their FSA ID, both in English and Spanish. So again, reminder to all, studentaid.gov accounts must be created and authenticated to start the FAFSA, which typically takes 3 days. Mixed status family reminders. All right. Just for all mixed status families, this is where your student is a U.S. citizen and parents do not have a social security number. First, the identity confirmation process is not, as of December 6th, is not being required for the 25-26 cycle. I was on a call with the U.S. Department of Education yesterday, and they reiterated this to all of us, that the identity confirmation process, so this occurs when a parent without social creates their account. Many at the end of step 7 will be informed that they, quote, need to complete the identity confirmation process. As we communicated during the boot camps, a parent may choose to complete the process. They may choose to, and it's totally okay in terms of if they choose to complete the process. The U.S. Department of Education is actually processing these, but it is not a requirement. And when I say it's not a requirement, it's not a requirement in order for the student to receive financial aid. So if a parent is unable to complete the process or chooses not to complete the process for the 25-26 cycle, their student can still be considered for federal and state aid. So just a reminder about the identity confirmation process not being a requirement through the 25-26 cycle. That being said, one workaround reminder that I experienced this week already is for mixed status families. It is still the recommendation to start from the parent perspective and invite the student. There are still glitches within the FAFSA system. If the student starts Again, these are mixed status families in this case. If the student starts and invites that parent without a social, there's still some glitches where the parent is unable to accept the invite. So again, when working with mixed status families who are completing the FAFSA, start from the parent's perspective. Have the parent log in, indicate that they're the parent, complete the parent section first, and then once that's completed, then the student can log in, accept the invite that the parent has sent them to complete the FAFSA. Again, I've already conducted a workshop with such families this week, and that worked seamlessly. But it works seamlessly by only beginning with the parent or from the parent's perspective. And then finally, from a reminder perspective, there are the occasional error messages that folks are still getting at times. And as a reminder, best practice, use private browsing, the incognito mode features, whether you're using Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome. If you get that error message, I would switch to private browsing or incognito mode within the browser setting. Also, reminders is delete the, Sarah, correct me, whether it's cache or cache, delete that as well. Those are tips from the U.S. Department of Education if any error messages are indicated. I know oftentimes when I'm doing workshops at schools where we're cycling through the same laptops, when we can, because folks, this, I know at some of your schools, you have turned off those features. And I get that. But at those schools that have not turned those features off, I oftentimes will have the user to do this right away, either go into private browsing incognito mode or delete the cache just to start basically from a fresh screen, from someone else who just logged out of FAFSA. New this year, if you have the question from a parent that's indicating, or a student that's indicating my mom and dad are divorced or separated, which parent do I need to use? They have created, U.S. Department of Education, a parent wizard. If you Google FAFSA parent wizard, this will take a student parent to the screen, which mimics the tell us about your parent screen within the FAFSA application. Listen, 18 years, right? Many of you have done this even longer than I have. Those oftentimes can be difficult conversations to have, where many of us can tell someone who needs to do the FAFSA, right? But sometimes they don't want to listen to us. I think this is a great tool for us to share with our parents and students, especially of divorced and separated households. If there is a question on who needs to complete the FAFSA, I would have them to Google Parent FAFSA Wizard and kind of work through that flow chart that will let them know specifically, who needs to complete the FAFSA in those divorced, separated, remarried situations. That being said, who is not a FAFSA parent, this is just a reminder for all of us. If you're working with a student who is being raised by a grandparent, an aunt, uncle, brother, sister, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, remember, folks, these individuals, generally speaking, will not complete the FAFSA unless they've adopted the student, okay? So in that case, then we consider your personal circumstances. Perhaps one of those may apply to the student, making them independent. For some of these situations, you as a school or school district may deem the student an unaccompanied youth or homeless that makes the student independent. And then obviously in some instances, some of these students are going to have to indicate they have an unusual circumstance to complete the FAFSA. But again, reminder, grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, legal guardians, these are not individuals who will complete the FAFSA unless they have adopted the student. I think 2 more slides before we actually get into the application itself. Just kind of a reminder from a student perspective, students a U.S. citizen, or if they are considered an eligible non-citizen, one of these 4 statuses, then these students are eligible for federal and or state aid, right? So from an eligible non-citizen definition per FAFSA, permanent residents, meaning green card holders, individuals with I-94 records, showing specifically one of those 4 statuses you see listed on that screen. From a visa perspective, the only visa that's eligible, quote unquote, for federal or state aid is a student that's on a T visa for human trafficking. So when counselors, students, parents, etc., ask me about any other alphabet soup visa, the quick answer is they're not eligible, right? Unless they have a T visa for human trafficking. And then finally, student who has been granted a battered immigrant or child status would also be considered eligible for federal and or state aid. Last 2 bullets, those T visa, battered immigrant and child status individuals, those are 2 categories I've actually never worked with. Sarah, I'm always interested when we lead these FAFSA webinars. If you are someone that has actually worked with someone, I'd like to say, yes, I have, because that's something I've never worked with an individual who has been granted either the T visa or the battered immigrant status personally, but I am always curious if someone has. From a neither perspective, so again, those alphabet soup visas, those students that are here on an F visa or J visa, these students are ineligible for aid. Students here under a temporary protected status, they're ineligible, again, from a FAFSA perspective. So my point is, these students should not be completing the FAFSA until they gain one of the eligible non-citizen categories or statuses or become a full U.S. citizen. And then finally, and then again, this is from a yesteryear perspective, but if you happen to run across a student, perhaps an adult that is under the DACA, the Deferred Action of Childhood Arrival status, those students, as a reminder, are ineligible for federal or state aid. So I would encourage them not to complete the FAFSA. If you're serving students that are of an ineligible status, for example, they're undocumented, our friends at EdTrust, they actually have, quote unquote, relaunched a resource page for these students. That QR code will take them to, will take you to that page's resources for undocumented students and students of ineligible statuses. So by all means, give that a look, and please share with any student or family that this is appropriate to share with. Now let's get into the actual FAFSA. Sarah, I think you want to say about 10:45, and you know what? The other day I actually did this in about 20 minutes. So here we go.
Very impressive.
Let's go. All right, studentaid.gov accounts. Studentaid.gov accounts. There's a reason I'm saying it this way. This way is at some point in time, per the U.S. Department of Education, they're going to quit using the term FSCID. So again, you're going to hear me try to convince you, studentaid.gov account, because that is something that apparently soon the U.S. Department of Education is going to switch their nomenclature from FSCID to studentaid.gov accounts. But as a reminder, for the traditional, dependent student, which generally is a student until they reach the age of 24 per FAFSA, the majority of students we serve must have parental information to complete the FAFSA. In most cases, I need the student to have a studentaid.gov account and one parent to have a studentaid.gov account in order to complete the 25-26 FAFSA. The exception, the caveat, is for parents who file taxes in 2023 separately. That is when you need the second parent to also have an account and complete a separate parent section of the FAFSA. Why is this needed? It's because each user of FAFSA needs to essentially provide that consent for FAFSA to speak with the IRS on their behalf. So think about this. If parents are married and the parents file jointly, right, that consent only needs to come from one parent because of the joint filing. However, if you have parents who are married, but they file separately for whatever reason, right, in that case, because of the separate filing, FAFSA needs permission from both parents, right, from each parent to reach out to the IRS on their behalf. So again, for most family situations we serve, The student will need to have an account, and one parent will need to have an account. Again, the exception is for those separate filers from a parent perspective. Again, reminder, studentaid.gov, this is where they go to create their studentaid.gov accounts. But that account, again, what we have formerly called the FSAID, must be created and authenticated, I would say at least 3 days prior to completing the FAFSA, just to give it time. So for those of you who are planning workshops, after, once in the new year or whatever, that's your big push. If you got colleges coming to help, if you got someone from our team coming to help, if you got Tennessee Achieves, someone from the AIRS Foundation, someone from the Niswonger Foundation, et cetera, coming to help your families complete the FAFSA, the biggest thing I think we would all ask is to encourage those folks who plan to attend is to create those studentaid.gov accounts at least 3 days prior to the workshop. Just a couple tips in creating the account. 1, in step 2, when it asks for the email, use a personal email. Use a personal email, right? A lot of times those high school emails will end upon graduation. So this is a great time if the student does not have a personal account, create a personal email account and have the student use that to create their studentaid.gov account. Also, as some of you hear that, if you're like, oh, Jason, well, we had a big FSAID creation workshop back in October and we use our high school accounts. Oh no, it's okay. You can go back into the account and edit the email at any time. But I would, again, encourage to always use a personal email. So if one was created with a high school email address, I would at some point encourage the student to go back in and edit it to from that high school to a personal email address. This is a tip I actually recently picked up from a colleague from the state of New York, and it was in regards to working with students who are homeless or working and serving families who are in witness protection. And in step 3, there is the ask of an address, and you do have to enter something. And the tip from the colleague in New York was, well, for these such situations, they just simply type general delivery within the address and then enter the city, the state, and zip as you normally would, just to get on and move past the address screen. So that's a tip when serving, families who are in witness protection or a student who is homeless or unaccompanied. You can simply indicate in the address field general delivery and then enter the city, the state, and the zip. Generally speaking, FAFSA is not going to mail anything, right? Generally speaking, but that's a tip that I've recently picked up, and I want to share that with the community. Also, from a mobile number perspective, as a reminder, I think many of us now see as we're working with specifically our high school seniors, when they enter the mobile number, they may get this pop-up message that the mobile number is already in use. Folks, that's because, right, many of our students just grind through mobile numbers. Sarah, you hear me say this all the time. Here I am about ready to turn 44. I've had the same cell phone number since I was 16, right? But many of our students perhaps have had 10, 15 mobile numbers in 2 years, right? So as a reminder, the mobile number is not required. It is not a required field. So anytime I'm working with a student who gets the message that your number is already in use, I just tell them, leave the mobile number field blank and move on, right? Because the only thing you must enter and verify is that personal email address. So if you get the mobile number is already in use message, you can leave that field blank to create that FSAID. Now let's get into the FAFSA screenshots. Folks, the good news is basically what we knew as the 24-25 FAFSA is what we know as the 25-26 FAFSA. So whether the student chooses to go to studentaid.gov and log in or FAFSA.gov to log in, step 1 is to log in once their account's been authenticated. And pause, again, reminder, I'm going to show you from the student's perspective, inviting the parent. But as you heard me say off the top, and if someone's just recently joined us, the exception right now, if you are working with a mixed status family where the parent does not have a social, in that scenario, you need to begin with the parent logging in, completing the parent section first, inviting the student. That is the exception for our mixed status families. You need to go from that direction, parent to student. Again, my illustration here is going to go from the student to the parent. That should work for all other scenarios. Student logs in, student completes a two-step verification. Student clicks the accept to move past the legalese. Student or any user must, as always, review their contact information. Also confirm that they have verified their contact information. But once you get through those screens, now it's time to start this 25-26 FAFSA. Click login to start. In this case, I'm the student. I'm going to select student, click continue, move on. Again, if you're working with that mixed status family and this is the parent logging in, this is where you would select the parent, click continue, and then on the next screen, that parent would then identify their student by first name, last name, social, and date of birth to send that invite to the student. That said, in this case, I'm the student starting the FAFSA. I click continue. We have the same 4 introductory videos that we became accustomed to last year. Continue through those. On this 4th screen, click Start FAFSA Form. This first screen, this is populated from the studentaid.gov account. So my assumption, if this has been authenticated, all this information is correct. Review, and then click Continue. Next, student will enter their state of residence. I'm assuming working with Tennesseans, you're going to select Tennessee and then enter the month and year they either moved to Tennessee, or if they are a lifelong resident of Tennessee, that would be the month and year of birth that you would enter as the date that the student became a resident of Tennessee. Tennessee, Sarah, my goodness, Tennessee. Next is that consent screen. So this consent screen, it gives permission for FAFSA to reach out to the IRS on behalf of the user. The key to the screen is to scroll down and click approve. If a user declines the screen, they will not be considered for any federal or state aid until this consent is ultimately approved. So the key to the screen for the student in this case is to click approve. This is actually the one new screen for this year, is once you click approve, there's this quote loading screen that comes up. And essentially what I've seen thus far is once that then loads, you get this we're securely importing your information screen. For those in the chat, I am curious if you've seen an alternative screen from this. Last night at a high school, had about 30 families doing the FAFSA at once. So you know how it is. I'm just hopping around from parent to parent. I did have a few parents that had to manually enter tax information. Unfortunately, I didn't observe what this screen looked like for them. My hypothesis is if you have to manually enter tax information, I'm wondering if this screen is different. So again, if you've seen an alternative screen already, let me know. You know, I'm curious what to see and go from there. But anyways, this is what I've seen thus far for, you know, those after they click approve. This success, you know, we're basically securely importing your information. And by the way, folks, this is even from a student perspective that didn't file taxes. So I have definitely seen it from that perspective, where even if the student did not file taxes, and many of them didn't in 2023 that we serve specifically in the high school communities, I'm still seeing this screen for them. Anyways, click continue, move on.
Eric says he has seen a different screen.
Okay. Eric, I'm curious if you will chat, man, just chat like what you've seen. I mean, does it say green check mark success, or is like there a red X that says, you know, unfortunately we were unable. Sarah, what did you say?
I said, you shall not pass.
Yeah. Eric, if you will, just chat what you've seen and that, just to share with the community. And thank you for letting me know. Personal circumstances. Student, what's their marital status, right? So single, continue, move on. Next, what would the college grade level be of the student, right? Y'all know this from my perspective. Generally speaking, I encourage high school seniors to indicate their first year freshmen. The key to this question is for a student to refrain from selecting that master's, doctorate, or graduate certificate program, right? Because that would then communicate with the college that they're no longer eligible for Pell Grant money, for example, right? But again, if working with a traditional high school senior, even though those that have amassed high school credit, I typically encourage them to indicate first year. In terms of will they have a bachelor's degree, right? I'm assuming the answer is no. Click continue to move on. Next, you have your personal circumstances. I encourage obviously folks to review these. This might be some of the questions that we have in about 10 minutes from now, or some that my team, myself, might have to address after this, just because of the sensitivity of such questions. But again, if a student's able to check one of these other boxes beyond none of these apply, that would make them independent on the FAFSA, right? Generally speaking, I think the majority of students we serve will click none of these apply, click continue to move on. Next is the homeless unaccompanied youth question. If this applies, answer yes. This would make the student independent. I think the new term was specifically provisionally independent in this case. But that being said, if it applies, yes would give them a route to independence. However, for those that this does not apply to, click no and move on. The final screen that will be shown from a personal circumstance perspective is for those students that have unusual circumstance where none of what you just read in previous screens apply to them. But let's say they live with a relative and there's zero contact with mom and dad. They have no idea where their biological parents are at all. Yet, for whatever reason, the school or school district cannot grant homeless unaccompanied youth status. Maybe the relative does not have legal guardianship per a court. This is the time when a student may have to consider the unusual circumstance path and ultimately follow up with the college to receive that dependency override. But again, this is only, use as needed or if needed. The majority of our students will indicate no to move on. This will then indicate that they're dependent. There is the question about, would you like to apply for an unsubsidized loan only? What we've seen changed on this screen, there's rewording of the question, but also no is the default response, because there were issues last year early on where students were misreading this question and they were indicating yes. And again, if you say yes, you are at least initially disqualifying yourself from Pell Grant in other state monies, right? Because you're indicating you only want to apply for an unsub loan. So again, the goal here is to select no and click continue to move on. Next, tell us about your parents. This is the screen that helps the student, basically identify, is this a two-parent household versus a single-parent household, right? So parents are married, yes, continue, right? Then we'll be we're identifying to FAFSA that the parents, that you're in a two-parent household. Whereas if you're in a single-parent household, you would indicate no, answer a few additional questions, and then you would ultimately isolate the single parent if from a single parent home. Once you click continue, the next screen is where you invite the parent or parents as appropriate. In this case, this is an example of a two-parent household. As a reminder, folks, the cheat on this screen is if the parents file jointly, you're only required to indicate one parent, send the invite, you can click continue. So like that's what I'm illustrating here, where I've sent the invite, quote unquote, to John Doe. You don't have to send one to Jane Doe necessarily in a two-parent household perspective, because John can identify Jane in the parent section of the FAFSA later. So again, this is the example of a two-parent household where you only have to send the invite to one parent, because as always, the parent who does the FAFSA, they will later identify their spouse as well. Student demographics, these are your traditional gender, Latino origin, and race questions. Select accordingly or select prefer not to answer. Next is the citizenship status question. If they're a citizen, select and click continue. If they are one of those 4 eligible non-citizen categories, if they have a green card, if they have an I-94 arrival departure record marked refugee, for example, this is where they'll select eligible non-citizen, and this is where they'll indicate their A number, which, as a reminder, is the USCIS number found on the green card or within certain U.S. government documents. Next, you have the parent education status question. Answer accordingly. You have the parent killed in the line of duty question. This is as a reminder on this field. If a student indicates yes, that they had a parent or guardian killed on or after 9/11 while serving the country, or while performing official duties as a public safety officer, what this will flag to the financial aid office is that the student is eligible for a maximum Pell Grant regardless of subsequent income information reported. High school completion status, this is where they'll indicate what their status is or will be, assuming they're graduating or have graduated from high school. They'll indicate diploma. They'll select their high school from the list. Guys, as a reminder, sometimes less is more. At least indicate the state, but then you can always fast forward to the high school name, begin typing, and then simply select the appropriate high school from the list. Once selected, click continue, then confirm the information, click continue. Now we're into the finances section of the FAFSA. This is a screen that will only be shown for an independent student. For our dependent students, they'll actually go straight to the filing status screen. Right, y'all know this that do this FAFSA. There are some different roads that a student will go down here. We'll come back and talk to the benefits from the parent section here in a few minutes. That being said, from a filing status perspective, right, if this question is presented, did you file taxes in 2023? Answer accordingly and move on. For students that did file taxes and had information pulled, this is an example of some of the remaining questions that they will encounter. And generally speaking, for the majority of students and also parents, the answer to these 4 questions are 0. Folks, this is one of those. Many of you are familiar with these questions. I'll just pause here for a second. Again, many of these do not apply specifically from a student perspective. I will highlight that amount of college grants, scholarships, and AmeriCorps benefits reported as income to the IRS. As a reminder, 99.9% of families we serve do not have to report scholarships or grants as income to the IRS, all right? As a reminder, so the majority of students we serve are going to plug in zeros for these questions and move on. Then the students will encounter the asset screens where they can report the amount of assets they have within these 3 questions. And I would assume that majority of students that we serve most likely will answer these questions as you see reflected on the screen. And then finally, this is where they'll select their colleges. As a reminder, the students can select up to 20 colleges. Obviously, our encouragement, meaning those listening to this as well, is probably enter the colleges you've applied to or perhaps are considering applying to that you have not yet applied to. That being said, as a reminder, you can always go back and make corrections and add more colleges later. Correction functionality is up and running already. So in other words, once a FAFSA is submitted, once it's been processed, the student can go back in there and add more colleges if needed, generally speaking, within 3 to 5 days of submission, because correction functionality is already up and running for the 25-26 cycle. Once they've navigated the college screen, now it's time to review the information. The goal of this screen is to scroll all the way to the bottom and click continue. As I was observing last night, folks, And these are screenshots from the prototype that I use every year. The unfortunate thing is the prototype does not actually indicate where the student can potentially actually enter into the parent section. Please refrain from doing that. Basically, when you get to the summary screen, they need to review this, scroll to the bottom, click continue, and then ultimately check a box, click sign to submit the student section of the FAFSA. Once submitted, the best thing to do, the student should log out, and now it's time for the parent to log in to their account. I worked with one of my favorites last night. I was working with one of my favorite financial aid administrators, and she came up to me and she said she was all worried about the email that was sent. And I said, forgive me. Do not worry about the email. Do not worry about the email invitation. Just have the parent to log in to studentaid.gov. So we did. And once we've logged in, there is a little screen before this that indicates that you have a pending invitation. Click view my activity, and then you go to this my activity screen where the parent saw this invite. They simply accept the invite, click continue, and now they're into the parent section of the FAFSA. It's the same 4 introductory screens that they continue through. Click that start form. This is where the parent will review their information. Click continue. This is that same consent screen that the parent will need to click approve in order for FAFSA to speak with the IRS. Under parent demographics, this is where the parent will indicate their marital status, their state of residency. Pause, as always. If the person lives in Tennessee, they need to indicate that they're a Tennessee resident and then the month and year they moved here, or if they're a lifelong Tennessean, the month and year that they were born. From a parent financial perspective, this is where I promised to just talk briefly about the federal benefits received page. This is where, for dependent students, the parent will be the one that navigates this screen. They can check whether or not themselves or anyone in their household or received any of the following benefits from this list, such as free and reduced lunch, Medicaid, etc. The one reminder here, the earned income credit. To verify whether or not a parent received that or not, look at line 27 on the 1040. So this is why it's always important to me, families to bring their 2023 tax information, is so that you and I can, just triple check. Look at line 27 to see if they got the earned income credit. Because if they did, check this box. And we may be able to skip their asset questions, right? So always check that. That's line 27 to see if they received the earned income credit. The family size question. Per the U.S. Department of Education, the advice remains. All users should say yes so that they see what the parent size is. We're still seeing that this is defaulting to either 3 in a 2-parent household, or 2 if a single parent household has been indicated on the Tell Us About Your Parent screen. Bottom line, indicate yes so that you see the family size number. If it's right, click continue and move on. However, if it's incorrect, meaning in this case, maybe I have a brother and sister, this is where you add the appropriate number from the box below to change that number from 3 to 4 or 3 to 5, whatever the case may be. So again, tip, always indicate yes so that you see what the family size is, and then move on or update accordingly from there. Number in college, from a calculation perspective, it's a worthless question now, but it is a question that colleges still want it to have on the FAFSA. So again, indicate how many folks within the household are in college, excluding the parents. So again, if it's just 1, you will indicate 1. If a brother or sister is also in college, you can change that to 2 or 3 or whatever it may be to reflect the number in college within the household. As we wind down here, parent tax information. This is a reflection of parents whose information has seamlessly transferred behind the scenes. These would be the remaining questions that they have to navigate. And again, for the majority of probably the parents that we serve, again, zeros is probably what you're going to enter in these. unless there is a rollover, for example. But specifically to the college grant scholarship and foreign earned income exclusion, my experience is most families will enter zero to answer these questions. I will share with everyone, especially working with mixed status families, I have already encountered, some parents that still have to manually enter tax information. Sarah knows this. I'm working on updating the where to find that tax information document. So once that is updated, we will share that with all of our counselors and college access professionals. Finally, the asset screen, same thing. Parents, report their assets on the screen. As a reminder, if I did indicate that I received a federal benefit, and if my income that was transferred or reported or manually reported was less than $60,000, then this asset screen will be skipped in those examples. And then finally, this is where, from a two-parent household perspective, this is where you will indicate your spouse's information if they're needed to one, be a contributor on FAFSA, but I always use, I use my wife and I as example, right? If we were doing a FAFSA for, a student, we filed jointly, I would still identify Pam as my spouse on this screen. So you have to do it. But please understand, because we filed jointly, I'm the only one that needs to complete the parent section. I just identify Pam on the screen, but Pam will not have to log in and do anything. The only time Pam would be if Pam and I filed taxes separately. It's review, check a box, click sign and submit, and the FAFSA is completed. And again, Sarah, you know this, like here it is, 10:50. Forgive me, perhaps 5 minutes over. But I will say this, experience last night, most students, it was taking about 15 minutes to complete the student section. It was taking 5 minutes to complete the parent section. Folks, this has been thus far, week one observation, a really good FAFSA experience thus far. And again, I'm talking from my perspective. Some of you may like, oh, Jason, I saw this issue, that issue. Again, from what I saw, at least week one, going to various high schools and community organizations, very seamless FAFSA experience, quote, for all students thus far. As a reminder, COTSforTN.org, I am in the process of almost re-recording all of our short walkthrough videos for families. Again, we will communicate that as soon as those are up on the website and I get those to Sarah.
Woohoo! It's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Amen.
Thank you, Jason. And yeah, I just wanted to point out, if you go to the screen that Jason just shared, the how to fill out the FAFSA tab on College for TN, you will find those updated FSAID step-by-step guides that you can print out and use with your students and your parents. There's a version in English and a version in Spanish. So I would really highly recommend everybody check out that page. Click around on College for TN, you'll find a lot of financial aid resources on there. So Jason, I just wanted to buzz through a couple of questions. We have a couple more minutes here, so anyone is welcome to add a few more questions. I'm just going to start from the first questions that we got and work down, and we'll see how quickly we can get to all of these questions. So the first question that we had was, if a parent chooses not to confirm identification. So this came up when you were talking about mixed status families. If a parent chooses not to confirm identification, will that delay or create any additional problems for them when they are completing the FAFSA? Do we know about that yet?
My screen has frozen. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you.
Good.
Did you hear my question? Do you want me to repeat it?
I did.
Okay.
I think Phil was the one that asked it. And again, the identity confirmation process, as a reminder, is not required this year. So whether a parent chooses to complete the process or not, there won't be any quote unquote problems with that, because per the U.S. Department of Education, and Sarah, again, Phil, thank you. And others may have asked the same other similar question as well. I think the other way to address this is, that's also your one caveat. Parents without socials, their accounts are authenticating instantaneously. So even for those that are selected for identity confirmation, that is not a requirement as of today for the 25-26 cycle. That's an example of a parent that's able to actually use that FSA ID immediately. Whereas for others of us, we do have to wait for that to be authenticated by the Social Security Administration. So as of today, Phil and others, there is, whether it's a parent without social chooses to complete the process or not, no delays. When they create their account, they're actually able to use their FSA ID immediately. But as a reminder, they will have to manually enter tax information because there's still an issue with the IRS sharing tax information, specifically with parents that have I-10s, right, that lack the social but do have an I-10, an individual tax identification number. There's still that issue, so you will have to manually enter tax information.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, next question. Eric did answer in the chat, but I just wanted to highlight it again. If a parent refuses to complete the FAFSA and the student has to complete it by themselves, will it hinder the student from getting financial aid? Which we know the answer to that question is that the student would only be eligible for loans. So we do really want to encourage our parents to get involved and complete their FAFSAs. Anything to add there, Jason? You want to keep?
No.
Okay, perfect.
I'd say short answer is no, right? Eric answered it. You answered it absolutely correct in terms of if the parent is refusing to provide their information, they are only eligible for loans until that parent acquiesces.
Got it. Perfect. Okay, so our next question, let me get back to my questions here. If the parent, this is an excellent question. If the parent is also a student in college and completing the FAFSA for themselves, can the parent use their same FSA ID as like their student FSA ID as the parent? Is my question making any sense?
That's our colleague Brian, I think, that asked. This is a great question, Brian. So Brian, in that case, like for example, Jason Seay, right? Jason Seay, I'm pursuing, let's say, my master's, and I have an FSA ID account. That is my account as me, Jason Seay. So whether I'm submitting the FAFSA for me myself for grad loans, or in the role I'm helping my child submit the FAFSA, I'm good to go with my FSA ID account, my studentaid.gov account. So in that example, this person would, the parent that already has an account, they're good to go. They're ready to rock and roll. It just would be the student that needs that account. Perfect.
Okay, next question, and you may have addressed this, but I just want to bring it up anyway. So sorry if I missed this part. But if a parent has not filed taxes for the previous year, how does that affect student?
Well, yeah, great question, and that's our friend Carol that asked that. Carol, in this case, I had this come up last night. This is where all of us need to become CPAs. Because remember, there are thresholds, right? And so the scenario I was presented last night is, well, it was a parent that was paid in cash, and so it's like, well, they don't file taxes. So what do we do? And I said, here's the reminder. If this is a single parent, $20,800 was the income threshold. So if you assume that a single parent would otherwise file head of household if required, the kicker is $20,800. So if you made less than $20,800 in cash, you were not required to file taxes. Thus, on the FAFSA, you would say not going to file. It would ask your income earned from work, quote unquote, your cash. And, let's say you earned $15,000. That's what you would enter. Now, another scenario last night was a small business owner simply had filed extension after extension after extension, and they just hadn't filed 23 taxes. Well, my advice, selfishly, was, well, from a state aid perspective, you've got until April 15th. My advice was, if you're planning to now work with a CPA and get those 23 taxes filed, my advice was get those taxes filed and then do the FAFSA at that point in time. The only caveat would be if there was a college, let's say an out-of-state college, that was requiring that FAFSA sooner than that. There is the idea you can always estimate your tax information. Still, you can. Because, for example, Sarah, if you and I were required to file taxes, but we didn't, and we do the parent section of the FAFSA, we click approve for the consent. Well, if the IRS doesn't find any information to transfer, guess what? They're going to manually ask us, did you file taxes? And the manual way of potentially navigating that is to say yes. and then, you know, estimate your tax information. But to make it cleaner, I would encourage the person to wait until they file their taxes once they get that 23 tax return, and then use that to complete the FAFSA at that point in time, whether it's January, February, or March, as opposed to forcing something right now.
Perfect. Awesome. You just pretty much exactly described my experience as a college student. My dad is a small business owner, so I really felt like I related to whoever you helped last night. Okay, so let's keep moving here. Somebody asked a question about if a student has a child themselves, if they maybe are a high school student, have a child themselves, and maybe their parent is refusing to fill out the FAFSA, but we know that a student who has a child could be considered an independent student. Is that correct, Jason? So their
Yes,
parent would not need to.
correct. That is potentially accurate, in terms of if I have a child, quote unquote, I'm, you know, 18, 19, 20, and I have a child, and that I provide the majority of their support to, then that would make me independent. You know, there would be colleges that would, you know, validate that I am in fact providing the majority of that child support. But as long as that can be validated, then that student is independent, and that would be your workaround from a parent that's refusing to provide their information, you know, from a dependent perspective. So again, having a child that you provide the majority support to would make you independent on the FAFSA.
Perfect. Okay, two more questions real quick as we're running right up against our time. One is, would a pension be considered an asset? So if a parent is drawing from a pension, would that be considered an asset on their FAFSA?
So retirement accounts are excluded as assets. There is the one pension question from a tax perspective, but pensions in terms of pensions are also, if I'm not, Sarah, who asked that specifically? That's one of those I always like to triple check the FSA handbook. But retirement accounts are excluded, and I believe that's also inclusive of pensions as well. Oh, it's Lori. I think it is. I know my friend Reed is on here, and Reed, I saw some of your chat as well. I think pensions are excluded from an investment perspective. So from an investment perspective, you're thinking 529 savings plans, money market accounts, CDs, stocks, bonds, etc. But retirement accounts, 401ks, 457bs, 403bs, pensions are excluded. Yes.
Perfect.
Final
Okay.
answer.
Love that. Okay, last question here, and I do want to make sure that I get this question correct. But Katie Holt said that she had a parent who completed their portion of the FAFSA first and invited the student. She said the student never received the invite, but has a verified FSA ID. Do you recommend that the parent deletes their entry and have the student start a new form? I feel like this could happen with other families too. So I'd love to hear what your advice would be for that.
Yeah,
Jason.
I think that would be my suggestion. If for some reason, and Sarah, forgive me, the scenario was the parent did their part inviting the student, and when the student logs in, there's not an invite there.
Yes, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, or vice versa. Folks, this is one of those, if the invite's not there, now it's time to triple check the invite screen and what you entered as first name, last name, social, date of birth of the invited person versus comparing it with the account information on the student.gov account settings personal identifier screen. So last night, Sarah had this exact example. Parent was not receiving the invite. And so we went to the invite screen, and I had the parent to log in, and we looked at the personal identifiers. As we compared the two, what happened is the student used one last name for the parent, right? And the parent had, in this case, a double last name. And the parent on the student.gov account, right, used the double last name to create their account. So that's why the invite wasn't coming through. Folks, you know, I know it's now 62 minutes into this, but that may be the most important thing for all of us to remember in helping support folks through the FAFSA. Attention to detail in terms of if something's not connecting, always triple check. the invite screen with the student8.gov account with the person being invited, and triple check that first name, last name, date of birth, and social as applicable, and go from there.
Perfect. That's a great reminder. I know that that can be, the FAFSA can be a little persnickety about those details. So excellent reminder. Oh no, my light is turning off in my room. It's timing out. I'm being too still. Okay, well, we're obviously right up against our time. We did have a couple of questions about resources for students who don't have social security numbers, or maybe parents who don't have social security numbers. Any resources that you have, or any ideas for how we can help to encourage those students or mixed status families?
There's the resource.
Perfect.
Yes. So I just chatted it. I mean, we talked about it. That was a QR code earlier. That's the URL to our friends at EdTrust, who have developed a wonderful resource hub for our students that are of an ineligible status. So definitely share those resources, with the students that you work with. It's a great resource hub.
Perfect. Okay. Oh, one last thing from Eric. He said, did you want to mention the tax poll notifications?
Sarah, I'm actually quizzically looking at the question. Eric, I don't know what you're referring to. Seriously,
Oh,
like the tax pool notifications. Hold on. Eric, you are saying no. This is good. Eric, you're referring to, quote unquote, once I provide the consent, I do get an email that basically indicates that the IRS has that. Eric, bless you. Thank you for that. So yeah, this is a reminder when you click that approve consent, and especially for those of us, for us that are able to transfer our tax data seamlessly, there will be a subsequent communication, sometimes in the form of a letter that indicates that, FAFSAs contacted the IRS to pull your information, and that's legit. So that is legit. The other thing, Sarah, just as a reminder that I learned yesterday on the U.S. Department of Education call is we're still getting those silly emails every time someone logs into their account. They're still getting that silly email that says, you have edited information on your FSCID. Those apparently are going to finally be turned off in an upcoming update here this month in December. So we may still get those emails over the next, say, few days or few weeks, but they said by the end of the month, those emails are going to cease and only be sent when you actually edited your FSCID, updated some sort of information.
perfect. Okay. All right. Well, we need to go ahead and wrap things up as we're right up against our time. But Jason, I just want to say thank you so much. It is always a pleasure. And I feel like every single time I've done, how many of these calls have we done together? Every single time I learned something new about the FAFSA. So, which might be speaking more to the changes of the FAFSA, but it's always super helpful whenever we get to hear from you. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. And we will make sure that we archive this webinar as well. Hope everybody has a wonderful, safe weekend. And thank you for joining us today.
Sarah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Bye.